It is that moment. This is the moment to get a glass of wine, to get a little bit of food, and to find a little position you want to be in, to hear some things that need to be said tonight. This is that moment. All right, wonderful. Oh, what a compliant crowd. My friends, it is so lovely to be with so many wonderful leaders across the social insurance ecosystem tonight. It feels very special that each of you took a little bit of time and navigated the heat to come and hang out. I see there's no one outside on the rooftop because it is a little too warm for that, but that's why we've got this wonderful indoor space. And I just want to say thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Rebecca Vallis. I have the pleasure and the privilege of serving as the CEO of the National Academy of Social Insurance. And I'm going to give a brief visual description before I go any further. I am a petite woman wearing my customary all black, but of course I've got lots of tree of life going on. And I have some short curly brown hair and some bright red lipstick. And so let me say, as we get into it this evening, Social Security disability insurance, along with a closely related part of Social Security that we know as supplemental security income, holds a particularly special place in my heart. And that's because it was my entry point into working on social insurance as a very, very young baby public benefits lawyer 2 decades ago. And that was also my entry point into being an Academy member, now that I think about it. And it was helping people access these critical protections that helped me understand social insurance as one of the clearest expressions of who we are when we remember that we're in this together, and that what solidarity looks like when we build it into the architecture of everyday life is itself social insurance. Nearly 91 years ago, and we are going to get a little bit of history tonight, we are going to do that. Nearly 91 years ago, when President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act into law, he called it, and this is a line a lot of you all repeat and know very well, a cornerstone in a structure which is by no means complete. And I return to those words often because they remind us that our social contract and social insurance has always been a living project, something that each generation is called upon to continue the work of building. So after the Social Security project got started in 1935, 21 years later, the next building block in the cornerstone of that structure started to get built. And that was July 1956. That's why we're doing this in July. July 1956, Congress added disability insurance to that suite of protections that we know as Social Security in recognition that most of us will experience disability if we live long enough, and many before we reach retirement age. So across the generations since, Social Security disability insurance, as it was named, has helped tens of millions of Americans maintain economic security, support their families, participate in their communities, and continue building lives of purpose and contribution. And it's there for nearly all of us, even if we haven't received its benefits ourselves. And that's because of the economic protection that it offers. Polling that the Academy was thrilled to do with AARP just last year found that 9 in 10 Americans say Social Security disability insurance would be important or very important to their economic stability if they experienced a work-limiting disability before reaching retirement. So that's an us, right? That's not a them. At the same time, and I want to acknowledge this given that it is July, over the 70 years since Social Security disability insurance has been in place, our understanding of disability has continued to evolve in incredibly important ways. And a lot has changed for the better in American society as a result. The disability rights movement challenged this country to see something that now feels really obvious to a lot of us, but was once revolutionary. That often it isn't disability itself that limits participation. It's the barriers built into our workplaces, our institutions, our policies, and our culture. And that we need to dismantle structural barriers in addition to maintaining and strengthening critical protections like Social Security disability insurance. And that is why it is so important that tonight, as we celebrate and reflect on 70 years of SSDI as it's come to be known, the Academy is also incredibly proud to honor Disability Pride Month, which each July marks the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, a landmark civil rights law that affirmed disabled people's right to participate fully and equally in American life, and which became another cornerstone in that structure that is still unfinished. So it's in that spirit that as we honor Social Security disability insurance at 70 tonight, we have brought together a phenomenal panel, and an all-lady panel, I have to say, I'm noticing as I look at this stage, of incredible leaders to help us reflect on how far we've come and how far we still have to go, and what it looks like to protect and strengthen Social Security disability insurance while also understanding it as part of a larger policy ecosystem that is very much still in progress. And to ask that question of what is our generation being called to build next? A little bit of a tall order for y'all, but you can take this. So before we do that, we are so honored to share a very short video produced by our dear friends at Atticus, featuring the voices of a whole range of people whose lives have been touched by Social Security disability insurance. And I just want to take this moment to say a huge thank you to our friends at Atticus for making tonight's event possible. Okay, let's give a little shout out to our friends for helping bring this party together. So let's ground this conversation in the people who have been touched by this program. I think we need a little sound. Try that again. It's Mercury retrograde. What did we expect?
What was going on in my life? I had seizures.
I had lost my job because I have a heart failure.
I was in a terrible car accident that resulted in a fractured neck.
Multiple sclerosis in 2008, and at that time I was told that I would never walk again.
I'm a walker here, deal with 9 metal plates.
Overwhelmed, stressed out. My hips hurt so bad, they kept me up most of the night. Because I would literally lay in there and just lay in the bed and cry.
It's 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm praying and saying, what I'm going to do now?
I ended up with liver failure, and I ended up having to be in the hospital 1 to 2 times a week. And of course, to have a job, you got to be there every day.
I just want to be able to live and be normal.
I was stuck in between doctors and therapists who were all here to help me, but none of them really knew what was right for me as far as how I would file for SSDI.
Just before we started this call, I got off with your field office.
Yeah.
And guess what news they gave me?
What did they tell you?
They said you've been approved.
Oh my goodness.
So I pulled up the Social Security website and it was like, you're approved. I was like, oh, shit. Oh, excuse me. I was like, oh my God.
I felt incredibly relieved and validated for just all of the years I've been trying to just work through the pain.
Validating is really a good word for it.
Thank God a judge heard me and a lawyer heard me. Wow, my God, I'm going to get what I worked for.
I'm terribly happy that I have worked, put money into that program.
They was like, no, you gonna get it. It's gonna take a minute, but you gonna get it, Kim. Why wouldn't you? That's your money. You worked hard for that money.
Not having to try to work with that pain and having that freedom that you guys have given me, it's changed my life immensely.
Because when you're in extreme pain, you don't make good decisions.
If I hadn't had that, I wouldn't be applying for Social Security disability. And if I hadn't been able to do that, I wouldn't be here.
And that was just huge help for me, just taking all of that weight off of my shoulders.
I didn't feel that burden on me anymore of not having any income coming in and having insurance again, and the difference was night and day.
Ever since I got benefits, my health has improved quite a bit.
It's allowed me to continue with my mental health treatment.
Finally got to go out for dinner, had a little extra money, and I even bought my daughter her prom dress. So your prom dress shopping wasn't no fun, but it was an experience that she got to have with Dad because I was able to afford it.
Thank you so much for your efforts. You don't know what this means to me. You don't know what this means to my wife.
Hi, my name is Chris.
Hi, my name is Tanya.
Thank you so much for working hard for me.
kind of wish I would have done this sooner.
Thank you very much, guys, for your help. And God bless you.
And I want to continue on that note of gratitude for just a moment, because there are so many people in this room, and there are so many people who are going to be listening to this video who are the people who are the ones who are the stewards of this program, right? And our larger social security system, but it's the people who help people access these benefits. It's the people who work at the Social Security Administration, often doing tireless work, making sure people can actually get these benefits, who we also need to recognize in this moment, and who the thank yous in that video really go out to. So I took a moment to thank Atticus, but I'd really like to take a moment to just say, if you're one of those people who helps people access this program, maybe wave a hand, maybe help the community acknowledge you in some way. Yep, thank you. Yep. And we've got some folks from the Social Security Administration with us too, and I really want to recognize and honor the leadership that they bring too. So if you're from SSA, wave a hand, let us know that you're here. Thank you. Yep. So with that, we're going to segue into this amazing panel conversation that honestly, if we had structured this evening differently, we would take 3 hours to have, because I would enjoy that, and I know you all would, but we're not going to do that to you. We're going to make this a little bit of a shorter lightning round panel, and then we're going to let you get back to doing a little bit of mingling and drinking and eating and all of the things. And the bar is staying open while we're talking, and the food is staying open, so please continue to do the things that make this an enjoyable conversation to be part of. But I will introduce our amazing panel. Kathleen Romig with the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Yes, please applaud. These are amazing leaders. We've got Sharon Lewis, the fearless Deputy Director of the Aging and Disability Health Policy Lab. Yes. We have Kenrya Rankin, who holds many different roles at the Disability Culture Lab, a new organization that we absolutely love. And which I'm a very proud board member of, I will say selfishly. And then last but certainly not least, the one and only Maria Town, who leads the American Association of People with Disabilities. And if you want to take either of us out later, we've got lots of stories about young Maria and young Rebecca, but we won't do those right now.
We went to college together.
We did. We were tiny humans. So Kathleen, we're going to put you on this spot to help us begin with some of the history, because that's where we got to start. So people often ask, will Social Security be there for me, right? And that's because most of the time, people are thinking about it as a retirement program, but it's of course a disability program as well. And so why was disability insurance added to Social Security in 1956, and why did Congress choose to make it part of Social Security rather than creating some separate program? What's the history there?
Sure. Fun fact, disability was part of the Social Security conversation right from the very beginning in 1935. The original framers of the Social Security Act talked about disability right from the beginning, but because the Social Security was born in the Great Depression in the midst of a really acute crisis, they just weren't able to get it in there at that time. It was just 2 decades later that they were, but throughout those 2 decades, there were consistent conversations about how to make it happen. Right from the beginning, the Social Security Board, which was the predecessor to the Social Security Administration, was talking about how to do this. Congress was debating how to frame it. And why is it so important to be part of Social Security? Because it is an earned benefit just like the rest of Social Security. It is seamless part of Social Security as well, in that it's the same tax base, it's the same structure where it's earned, and your amount of your benefit is based on those earnings and contributions to the system. And once you become eligible for Social Security disability, you seamlessly transition to those retirement benefits when you retire. And really all along, right from 1935, the Social Security program has served people with disabilities because, as Rebecca said, if we live long enough, most of us will acquire a disability, if we're lucky enough to reach older ages. And so right from the beginning it did, but it became an explicit part of the program about 20 years in.
And just staying with you for a moment, because I feel like sometimes those of us who are, say, younger than 91 and therefore don't remember this country before Social Security, we take certain things for granted, right? That, oh, it's always been this way, and it hasn't always been this way, right? So what did things look like before, and what would America look like today if we didn't have disability insurance as part of Social Security? We heard little bits about that in this video.
Yeah. I mean, one of the most consequential things that happen if you are born with a disability or you acquire a disability is that it makes your financial life much more precarious. It makes it harder for you to meet your own needs, and if you have a family, to support your family as well. And so that's one of the things, and it's something that to this day people are not very well insured against in the private market. Most of us don't have disability insurance in the private market. And, still in the, with short-term disability, we don't have that in the public sector as well. But that's really important. If you can't afford your basic needs, your housing, your food, your clothing, your transportation, that can be catastrophic. And then on top of that, there are so many additional costs that come along with having a disability, additional Medicare, medical costs, accommodations, therapies, all the rest, much of which is often not covered by insurance. And so it's very important that people have both Social Security disability and the access to Medicare that comes along with that.
It's a great segue to bringing you in, Sharon, because you sort of are like a living bridge between some of these different systems, right? We've got income, we've got health, right? These are not separate experiences in the lives of people because life doesn't happen in silos. But you don't just bring really, really deep policy expertise. You also bring a lot of personal experience with these systems because you're the mother of a young woman named Zoe who actually benefits directly from these types of programs. Talk a little bit about what this set of protections and systems mean, not just financially, but in terms of your daughter's ability to live independently and to be part of the family.
So first of all, I have to start by acknowledging that Zoe gave me permission this evening to talk about her with a caveat that I'm not allowed to embarrass her, which I will try not to do. So my daughter, Zoe, is 29 years old. Lives with an intellectual and developmental disability, so she has had a disability her entire life. Zoe is a person that when she was much younger, we were told to expect very little from Zoe, and that Zoe wouldn't read, or Zoe wouldn't write, or Zoe wouldn't do this, or Zoe wouldn't do that. And I am very proud to say that Zoe is a person who started receiving SSI benefits when she was 18. And has recently worked herself off and on her own work record is now on SSDI. And it matters because SSDI becomes the foundation upon which she can build. I loved your reference to the cornerstone, right? And we still have a lot of building left to do in terms of the gaps in the system for people. But at the end of the day, SSDI and SSI have created a foundation from which she can build, and not only for her, but for her sisters and for our family. The thing that we hear from families of people who have lifelong disabilities is what is going to happen when I die, right? I mean, any of you who are family members in this room know what I'm talking about. And we know from census data about a quarter of the population lives with a person with a disability in their household. Now, those are not all SSI and SSDI recipients by any stretch of the imagination. But every family in this country is at risk of being affected, right? Any of us can develop a disability at any point. And when you don't, as a parent, know what's going to happen, that's terrifying. And the opportunity to be able to say to her siblings, Zoe is going to be supported. Zoe's going to be able to work. Zoe's going to be able to live in the community and have friends and have a job. She works for the city of Portland. She's very proud of that as an employee of doing government service. And it has made a huge difference in our lives, and that intersection between social insurance programs, including the Social Security Administration programs, as well as health insurance, is just critical.
Maria, I'm going to go to you next because, number one, I was thanking you when you came in for making time to do this, because we're in the middle of Disability Pride Month and there's a lot going on right now in the community. And that's part of why we wanted to make this conversation a larger conversation, which is what it should be. And so I mentioned we're not just celebrating DI's 70th, we're also marking the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act as we do every July. And sometimes when we're in policy spaces that are way less smart than this one, because I know you guys get this, people will say, oh, isn't Social Security disability insurance like in conflict with the Americans with Disabilities Act? Isn't there some kind of tension there? Like one's about work and the other's about benefits. Talk a little bit about how these two cornerstones, if that's what we're gonna stick with tonight, actually work together in building the kind of society we know that we can have where disabled people actually belong.
Well, I want to be kind of candid up front and say that I do think there's some tension, and it's okay that we acknowledge that because tension is what often keeps buildings upright. But at their core, both the SSDI program and the Americans with Disabilities Act acknowledge that disability is a natural part of the human experience. That is core to both things. And SSDI is really interesting when you look at the history, Kathleen, because some of the actuaries were like, you know, disability really needs to be an elastic category. And that was one of the reasons that it took 20 years to make DI happen. And the Americans with Disabilities Act acknowledges that disability is a huge, broad, diverse category of experiences. Where the two differ is that where the ADA has this broad definition of disability, SSDI ties disability to the inability to work. And that's where the tension comes up. Even though there is that tension, both the ADA and SSDI, in acknowledging that disability is a natural part of the human experience, are some of the tangible ways that we ensure disabled people have dignity in the United States. The Americans with Disabilities Act protects disabled people, full stop. Disabled workers are eligible for SSDI, full stop. And those two frames are just very, very similar. I will also say both the SSDI program and the ADA are the floor, not the ceiling, to use yet another building metaphor. Floors are very important. I would prefer to have a floor than be without one. But we have a lot of work to do to build the rest of this structure.
Kenrya, this is a perfect place to bring you in because floors are very important. I'm grateful for the one that we are on because otherwise being on the rooftop would not be very fun for any of us. And at the same time, the floor is not the ceiling and shouldn't be. And so Kenrya, one of the things I am most excited about, and there are a lot of things I'm excited about that the Disability Culture Lab has been up to since y'all got off the ground, but you've been convening a whole bunch of North Star visioning, bringing folks together across the disability community and across other parts of the ecosystem to ask not just what policies do we have right now and what's falling short, but what kind of future do you want to create, right? And that's the work we're all in. We're all in the work of future making and world building. That's what we do in policy. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about that North Star and what it looks like to actually have a society that embraces people with disabilities in the ways Maria was describing.
Absolutely. So first, just thank you for having me. Happy to be here with you all. And I want to give a quick visual description. I am a dark-skinned Black woman with bob-length locks and a shirt that is very cool and talks about the ways that oppression is disabling, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. Some very bright pants that I got influenced to buy off of TikTok. Black and white shirt that makes me look a little bit like a referee, and some shoes that match that are one of my favorite pair. Okay, so, you know, as Vala said, I'm managing director at Disability Culture Lab, and, you know, we are a nonprofit disability media and narrative lab that focuses on building strategic communications infrastructure by and for the disability community. And we do that because our mission is that we want to shift the narrative on what disability looks like in this country, from this place of like pity and isolation, right, and fear, to a place of solidarity and liberation. And we use narrative as the intervention here because we know that just as bad stories lead to bad policy, the good stories lead to good policy. And those good stories then pave the way for material improvements in the way that disabled people live in this country. And, you know, one of the ways that we uncover those good stories is through our North Star visioning. It's a collaborative tool that we use to help groups and individually, but also entire movements in this case, to really figure out, like, what are your shared goals, what are the narrative priorities that we want to move forward with so that we can defend our communities and build the world that we want to see and not just resist. I'm not telling you anything new by saying that we're under attack in this country right now. We got a lot of folks in very high places and their friends as well who are just kind of doing eugenics all over us for fun, I guess. And so we're in this place right now where we can't just block, defend, and resist against what's happening. We gotta do the work to build a more accessible future. And to do that, we gotta figure out where the hell we wanna go. And although we know that narrative intervention works at DCO, we're not arrogant enough to think that we can figure out where we need to go by ourselves. So we worked with our partners to identify about 75 people across the DISCO to come together. We called on disabled advocates, creatives, organizers, academics, policymakers, researchers from a lot of different backgrounds to come together to really just dream and not get caught up in, you know, what I feel like is often incrementalism, right? Where we're forced to just kind of respond to the immediate threat that is in our face in that moment, to really think beyond that to where we want to go. And so we ended up with about 40 people who had the capacity and the interest to dream together. And we ran 6 very long future dreaming sessions between October of last year and January of this year to figure out this set of liberatory narratives that we want to move forward as a group. And then we worked with community editors that were pulled from those groups in order to take that data and turn it into a report that'll detail those outputs. And we're in the point right now where we're doing like sign-ons and things like that. And that report's gonna come out in September. But I wanna give y'all a little bit of a sneak peek at some of the stuff that will like our biggest takeaways at the lab from the work. And the biggest thing is that it kind of refutes this thing that has been kind of held up as being the key to everything, which is diversity. What we found is that diversity alone is not enough to resist authoritarianism. Like, it's cool to have a lot of different people at the table, but what we really need is interdependence. And disability justice, you know, is built. That is one of our 10 principles. It's one of the cornerstones of our work at DCL. It's a cornerstone of the movement. We need independent communities, and we need culture shifts, and we need policy that help to promote that interdependence so that we can push back against fascists. And we also, though, have to realize that interdependence doesn't just happen on its own. It has to be built intentionally by promoting cultures of radical inclusion over just simple accommodation. And that's in organizations, that's in neighborhoods, and very importantly to this conversation, it's in policy.
Thank you for weaving all of that together. And interdependence, right, is what social insurance is basically a living expression of. It's part of why I love you bringing that in, right, because it also is more than, but it does include policy. So I want to go back to kind of the social security, disability insurance, where do we go next piece of this, right? We've brought a lot of good perspective and a lot of kind of that zoom out. How do we understand this policy conversation and this issue within that larger context? And I think a lot of folks wonder, what is this generation's calling when it comes to building on the cornerstones? We're going to stay with, I think, that building metaphor, even though I don't know if any of us have any experience building physical things and not just
Legos.
policy, but we're all talking like we do. We're all talking like architects up here. So we're just going to stick with that because we're in that metaphor. And so I want to go back to you, Kathleen, because there are some very specific ideas that get talked about, but maybe don't get enough attention sometimes in these types of settings or in the Social Security conversation that are really about where we agree and where Americans agree we need to go next to honestly solve some pretty basic challenges that I think they wonder why are policymakers not doing more on this. One of those is actually modernizing some of the key rules in programs like SSI that fit very much in tandem with Social Security disability insurance. What do you see as opportunities to modernize? And it might be the policy on the books, but it might also be access to benefits, which is a challenge too. So where do you want to kick us off with? Where do we go next?
Exactly. I mean, I think one thing that you see on both sides of the aisle is they want to make it easier for people with disabilities to work and receive the support that they need. Just like Sharon was saying, exactly, from personal experience, that, when you talk to people who have a disability or don't, like work is a very important foundational thing in their lives. And the fact that it often does threaten the supports that people need to live those lives is a big deal. And that's something where we have pretty robust bipartisan agreement on. Another is marriage. Like often marriage can threaten the continued access to the benefits that people need to get by. And that's another thing that where we have some bipartisan agreement. And access is so important. To apply for a SSDI benefit or an SSI benefit takes at least months and often years. Often people are without the needed support that they need to pay their bills, the health insurance that they need, while they're waiting for a decision from the Social Security Administration. It is a minimum of 6 months just to get to an initial decision, at which 3/4 of people are rejected. To get through the whole appeals process typically takes years, and these are years that people are they're not able to pay their rent or their mortgage. People, they lose their homes and sometimes their marriages during this time, and it has to be faster. And I think everybody across the aisle in both parties agrees that we just need to do better in getting people access to the benefits that they've earned through their contributions to this really important program.
Which a lot of the segments in that video really gave a lot of personal experience testimonials too, right? A lot of people saying, I was told it would take this long, or, I wouldn't have been able to do this without help. It's sort of become a truism that you basically need a law degree to get disability benefits, and I think we can all agree it shouldn't be that way. And I want to give a lot of credit and a special shout out actually to Jay Ortiz, wherever he is, for leading a lot of that work at the Social Security Administration right now that's really about trying to improve access. Did he step out for his shout out? Did he really do that? All right, well, if you could all be my witnesses that we said that when he comes back in the room, he missed his moment. All right, so I want to take the same question to you, Maria. Where do we need to go next as we ask that question? What do we build next, and how do we continue to build on this important program?
So Rebecca, I realized in my first response I forgot to name one key thing that the ADA and SSDI have in common, which is that when used well, they can both be life-changing. So I think there are many things we need to do, but I want to name a few. I want to acknowledge that part of the issues with SDI exist because of the inadequacies across the rest of our policy infrastructure. Yeah. So people who are fighting to get on SSDI, they likely needed FMLA beforehand, where they were not paid during that leave. Having national paid leave exist before someone needs to go on SSDI would mean that people are not literally like praying, trying to survive before those benefits come in. We need the asset limit for SSDI to be updated. We need Medicaid buy-in programs to exist. And the thing that I want to mention, and I'm going to pivot a little bit, but I talked about how SSDI defines disability as an inability to work. And that definition has a pretty toxic legacy. One of the dominant negative stereotypes of disabled people is that we just don't work, right? Well, that definition has shown up in the way that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services is defining medical frailty in the new Medicaid community engagement requirements. That was not what Congress intended. Congress outlined that particular people with certain types of disabilities would just be exempt from these work requirements. But they utilized, the agency, CMS, utilized the definition of disability in SSDI to justify a stricter definition in these work requirements that will make this policy change much more difficult for states to administer and way, way more difficult for individuals and families to navigate. And so one, there's a comment period open right now through July 31st. Everyone in this room should comment. And you can say in your comments that this definition of disability does not reflect the lived reality of disabled people, not only in these work requirements, but across all federal programs. Because we really need to eradicate this idea that being disabled inherently means you cannot work. What we need to change is what the idea of work is.
Sharon, I'm going to hop back over to you because Maria just gave a litany of ideas. No, and only just got started because there's a longer list there of what needs to happen that isn't within the four corners of Social Security, right? To have an ecosystem that if you experience disability, you're actually not going to just need to go straight to applying to DI, which is often the end of a line after a lot of other policy failures for people, as Maria was outlining. And one of those big failures as well, and one of the big missing pieces for a lot of folks that the social insurance community is very aware of, is we don't have meaningful long-term care in this country, right? And so that's a real issue that's close to your heart.
So, and Maria stole a little bit of my thunder there. Yes, please comment
Keep it going,
on the
Sharon.
IFR. The fact that, one of the populations, right, that is going to be most affected by how CMS has defined the medical frailty are people who are on SSDI who've not met their 24-month waiting period for Medicare. And since we've had the Affordable Care Act, we know that states have used Medicaid for people with disabilities through the expansion population as a safety net, including people who are on SSDI who are waiting for their Medicare benefit. I think most people in the room know here, right? When you get SSDI, we now have a waiting period of 24 months before you become eligible for Medicare. And on the other end of it, we also will have people lose their Medicare after a period of time if they work themselves back off. So you've got this thing where we box people in and we say, we're going to give you insurance. Oh, just kidding. You've worked too much and now we're going to take away your insurance. And I think it's this fundamental issue of, are we going to support people to have the things that they need, including long-term service and supports that allow people to work, allow people to live in the community, frankly, save states a tremendous amount of money when people are working and living in our communities and contributing because they're healthier, they're happier, they're paying taxes, right? We often joke that people with disabilities is the one category of people in this country that want to pay more taxes because they want to work and they want to be able to pay into the system. Right? So this paradigm where we say you cannot work in order to get a benefit, but you must work in order to have a life, right? Most of us get a lot more than our paycheck from our jobs. We get purpose, we get community, we get friends. We have to fundamentally change that. And there are many different ways we can do that in terms of both big picture and small, and reducing those frictions that people experience in trying to even access the existing benefit structure, let alone a more forward-looking opportunity for people with disabilities.
And I just want to acknowledge a lot of folks in the room, and some of the folks up on this stage are part of a group project that the Academy is really proud to be co-leading with the Aspen Institute, which is around removing barriers to work and savings in our public programs, because we can all agree, wherever we sit in this ecosystem, and frankly, even across the many partisan divides it feels like we have right now, that we shouldn't have policies that create barriers to work and saving. And what we should be doing is asking the question, how do we remove those barriers in a way that doesn't blame the lifeboat for the flood, right? Which is a really important thing to do as well. So Kenrya, you talked a little bit about some of the narrative work that the Disability Culture Lab is really pioneering and really leading the way on in shifting away from kind of narratives that are rooted in pity and charity, right? Even if people maybe come from a place of good intentions and don't realize that they repeat those, sometimes we do, right? And sometimes that happens, especially talking about programs like this, and moving towards a narrative that helps us understand disability as a natural part of the human experience and as part of a we. Talk a little bit about how that shift in narrative changes the way that maybe we can talk about programs like Social Security, disability insurance, and how it fits into that broader project of building a society where everyone belongs.
Oh boy, okay.
I gave you the easy question.
So it's interesting because I was prepared to answer the question that they answered, but that's okay. So it's interesting because I kind of think, how much time do I have? That in order to kind of look at what that future looks like, we got to look at what it looks like right now. And the reality of it is, in this country, that systemic oppression is really embedded into everything from its beginning, right? From, colonization to enslavement to our current policy, oppression is really at the core. And what we know is that oppression, which pushes people like me to the margins, is also pushing people into disability. There's harm in those margins. And, while disabled people have always existed and we will always exist, and disability is a natural thing and it's not inherently negative or positive, there are a lot of people whose disability really starts with that harm. And that's why disabled people in this country are disproportionately Black, Indigenous, other people of color, queer, trans, immigrants, women, low and no income. And it's not because there's something wrong with us, right? There's nothing wrong really with our body minds. We're not broken. No, it's because there are institutions and there are individuals who use policy and practice to oppress people, whether it's for profit, for convenience, or just because they hate us. And those intentional acts of harm then create disabling health and economic disparities that we all have to live with every day. And so that oppression, is literally everywhere. We see it when a Black autistic teenager is shot by the police. If he's lucky, he's further disabled. If he's unlucky, he's dead. We see it with ICE kidnapping our disabled neighbors off the street. They're ignoring their medical needs. Folks are either leaving facilities with more disabilities. They're not having their health needs met. They're sent back to countries where their health needs couldn't be met in the first place, which is often part of a lot of people's journey to the United States in the first place, or they're killed before they even get to see the sun again. And so that's why we talk about oppression being disabling and all forms of oppression being disabling. Racism, queerphobia, transphobia, ableism. All of it is disabling, and that means that to us, every social justice issue is actually and ultimately a disability issue. And so when we're clear on that, we know that the only ways that any of us can get free is if we all get free. And so that new world that we would like to create, where we're living into the values of disability justice, and we are, making it so that all oppressed people are able to move forward with our lives, really looks like a lot of things. And I want to share kind of 5 points that came up in our work that kind of illustrate what that could look like if we had all of these cornerstones in place that everyone else talked about. So one, we live in inclusive and interdependent communities that we choose, where everyone belongs and everyone has autonomy and has control over their own lives. All disabled people would have access to the care that we need for ourselves and our loved ones. We'd be allowed to work, to save, and to marry freely without tax or penalty, and our benefits would not need to be tied to our work or our income. And I think that's kind of an important part that we haven't really discussed. Like we've talked a lot about about labor and work and the tension there, but the thing that really came out of this and that is really important to us is the fact that we really need to decouple our benefits from our ability to perform labor, period. A third thing is that we would not just have accommodations. We'd have a policy of radical inclusion and a culture of radical inclusion, so that we are not forced to use the ADA to use expensive lawsuits to be able to win the accommodations that we need, but instead we would start from a place of radical inclusion with everything that we build, so that everyone is actually here. Fourth, we would have everything that we need to not just survive, but to actually live and to thrive. Everybody, whether or not you have a disability. We all deserve housing, food, transit, meaningful work if we want it and are able to do it, community and joy, regardless of whether or not we can perform that labor. And then also we would have deep funding for access and care. And then tied to that, we would have the abolition of carceral systems, which include institutionalized healthcare, forced nursing home and psychiatric facilities, prisons and jails, immigrant detention centers, guardianships, and the family regulation system. Yeah. So that's just a few of the things that came out of the work that we've been doing over the last year, which is why we're really excited to share it with y'all soon. Yeah.
Small list.
It's teeny tiny.
It sounds like maybe, a single bill that could happen in just one Congress, right? Yeah?
Yes.
That was your vision? Yeah.
With
All right.
support from both sides of the aisle, too.
I said we were in the work of world building and future making, and I feel like all of these amazing folks have given us so much food for thought. And so I would love to just give each of you kind of one quick moment to close us out with any final thought you want about where you see the work going from here and what charge you want to give to this community, because we've given a lot of different ideas out tonight. But in a sentence or two, what would you share as a closing thought that is what you want to share as marching orders with the social insurance community with us tonight? And Kathleen, I'm going to go to you first and let Maria think. That's her thinking face, I know.
Okay. Well, as this is a celebratory occasion, the birthday of Social Security Disability Insurance, I wanted to celebrate something that's really amazing that just last month, or actually earlier this month, the regulatory agenda came out for across the federal government. And for the Social Security Administration, there was a notable absence, which was what the regulation that advocates nicknamed the mega reg, that would have rewritten the rules on who qualifies for disability and was reported to be the biggest disability eligibility cut ever. And so we are just thrilled that, because of the public education that happened about this proposed rule, and because people began to understand how important this program was for individuals, for families, for communities, and particularly for the communities in red states, in the Rust Belt, in Appalachia, and other places that are really important, not just to one party or another, but to everybody. We are delighted to know that the administration and the leaders of the Social Security Administration backed off of these harmful cuts.
I mean, I have to say, you didn't even give a marching order. You did a we already did it, and you got applause anyway. I love it.
Keep up the good work.
There we go. There's the marching order. There's the marching order. I love it. All right, Sharon.
Whatever we do collectively, because nothing is going to happen unless everyone in this room is working on it, we need to make it easier for people, right? Whatever that looks like. Well, basic income now, maybe, but within the realm of SSI, SSDI, Medicare, and Medicaid, which is the space that I live in, we have to make it easier for people. It should not be such an ordeal, right, as some folks have described it, for people to get their basic needs met, to ensure that they are able to live in the community in interdependent ways, and we need to make it easier.
And a lot of people in this room are working on various parts of that because that is a group project, and that's folks at SSA, that's folks outside of SSA, and I'm grateful to everyone who's part of that. Maria.
I've already given one marching order, which is comment on the IFR.
You did, that is true. You did get one marching order already.
So I'll say that again. Comment on the IFR, July 31st deadline. But building on Sharon's point, so AAPD and the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund published research about the status of things at SSA. And that research shows some of the changes that have happened at the agency within the past year and a half, and how the SSA service structure has really been torn apart. And what I'm going to say is we have to keep prioritizing human-driven service delivery. In attempts to make things easier, there's often a push towards introducing more tech. And I'm not saying that more tech is not part of the answer, but more humanity is definitely a requirement in this answer.
That's right.
So pay attention to where the tech is being introduced and where humans are being taken out, and say something about it.
Is my mic getting cut off?
They said
No?
you talked too long.
All right, I'm back on. I'm back on, guys. We got 2 more hours. Just kidding. We're in the closeout. Kenrya, one final marching order.
Gather your people. You know, all oppression is disabling framework, makes it really clear that we are all one bad corporate decision, disabling job, instance of state violence, or bad policy decision away from disability. So whether and while it shouldn't matter if you identify as a disabled person or not to care, unfortunately, oftentimes that's what it takes for people to give a damn. But we think, it's important to bring the people who you are in community with along as you try to make any kind of progress. So gather your people, let them know why this is important, get them to go in and make a comment, get them to attend, things like this, work cross movement, because we can't really connect the dots between the policy that we have and the policy that we need if we're not doing this work together.
Can't think of a better message to end on than gather your people, because that's what we at the Academy are so honored to get to do. It's why we're thrilled you're with us tonight. And if you're here, if you care about Social Security, you're our people. And just a lot of gratitude and a lot of appreciation to every single person who is part of the project that is Social Security, because we are in this together. And that's not just because the program itself is a living expression of that. It's because continuing to steward these systems is a group project, and it's one that no one person can do alone. So thank you to our amazing panel tonight. Please join me in thanking them, as well as Atticus, for making tonight possible. And I kind of want to say, as you were, please go about hanging out.